Geopolitics and Empire is joined by author, blogger, and journalist Iain Davis of IainDavis.com. Welcome to Geopolitics and Empire, Iain.
Hi there, Jay. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, you do awesome work, and I would like to get, maybe to start, your overall big picture take of what's going on in the world. I often ask my guests to re-summarize their positions regarding what's going on in the world, even though I and some listeners may be aware of them, because I think our positions are continually updated as time goes by and new developments force us sometimes to recalibrate our understanding of events. And there are going to be many in the audience listening to Iain Davis for the first time. And I'm of the view that the endgame of all of this stuff that we've been talking about is world government, and that multiple pretexts are being used to bring in this global governance, from the concocted international terror threat to the manufactured climate threat, and COVID-1984, which I see as a planned event to bring about the Great Reset. All of those pandemic simulations that we've been having, and the purpose is to install basically a digital technocracy and social credit system or algorithm ghetto into every single nation on the planet. And so I see all of that moving ahead quickly. So that's sort of my quick take. What's your view of what is transpiring right now globally?
Oh, yeah, I think we're going through a transition process. I think that transition process was planned many years ago. I mean, we can go back many decades to look at some of the ideas that were coming out of the think tanks that spawned the kind of political agenda that has been now evolved into policies that we're seeing, particularly with regard to things like sustainable development goals and so forth, which are part of moving us towards the system that you describe, a technocratic system. I think probably since about 2008, with the financial crash, there's been an added sense of urgency, which is notable in some of the statements of the people who we might say pull the strings behind the scenes. We might identify people like Ben Bernanke and people like Augustin Carstens and people like that from the Bank of International Settlement. And in particular, we might talk about the former Bank of England and now UN envoy for climate change, Mark Carney. People like that, if we look at their statements, then we can start to piece together where this is heading. And I very much agree with you that it's heading towards a system of global technocratic control, which I would say is based upon the idea of governance. And I do draw a slight distinction between governance and government. And the purpose of that is to install a control system that is based upon what the philosopher George Agamben described as the biosecurity state, which is a mechanism for controlling our behavior. And I think behavioral control is a very big part of the transition period that we're going through. Ultimately, I think the ultimate objective is to introduce a new international monetary and financial system. I think the everything from COVID to the current war that we're seeing in Ukraine is part of that transition process. I don't consider national governments to be necessarily in charge or heading or leading that process. I think there are very powerful institutions and financial institutions in particular, and also intergovernmental institutions and organizations that have an important role in forming the agenda to move us towards, as I said, and I agree with you on this, a technocracy with biosecurity at its heart, aiming at a transition of the international financial and monetary system.
A message from our sponsors. It seems we may be headed for the 1930s all over again. Financial collapse, tyranny, and world war. I've already secured multiple passports, offshore accounts, safe havens, and escaped to the sunnier shores of Mexico. My friend Mikkel Thorup of the Expat Money Show is hosting the Expat Money Summit with 30-plus experts that'll help you reclaim freedom in this fourth turning by moving your life and wealth offshore. Protect yourself and secure a new life abroad. Register now for free at expatmoneysummit.com, or don't and enjoy surviving on insect protein while stuck in the metaverse. Since 2020, Ron Unz of Unz.com has argued the COVID outbreak was due to a U.S. biowarfare attack against China and Iran. Jeffrey Sachs, the Russian Ministry of Defense, and others are now making similar suggestions. Weeks before COVID appeared in Wuhan, a top U.S. biowarfare official ran the Crimson Contagion exercise on how to protect America against infection if a dangerous virus suddenly appeared in China. After COVID appeared in Wuhan, it jumped to Iran, infecting Iranian leadership only weeks after America had assassinated Iran's military commander. Iran publicly accused America of an illegal biowarfare attack and filed a complaint with the UN. Ron Unz has produced a free ebook and is available for interviews to further discuss this issue. And don't forget to fund Geopolitics and Empire. You can leave a donation, except on Patreon or PayPal, which have banned us, book a consultation, or become a member. I wanted to touch on the multipolar part, get your opinion there. You know, I'm generally in agreement with you on that matter, although I do still leave a tiny bit of leeway for some X factor where, you know, maybe a Putin or some other actor whips out a black swan or goes JFK. But generally, I view all states and state actors as mafias, basically, at this point, who generally believe in globalism, or as you said, institutions which basically control these states, and they believe in supranationalism, in world government. And one of the keys for me in figuring this out is their positions on regionalism. You know, many people might think I'm also a Mexican citizen. The president of Mexico, AMLO, seems to be anti-globalist, but he's recently proposed a North American Union based on the globalist EU structure. Putin out in Russia and Nazarbayev are proponents of a Eurasian Union, which is, also globalist. And these are sort of like the puzzle pieces to put together a true world federation and world government. And, you can't have a world federation or government without integrating infrastructure across the board, such as the Belt and Road is doing in many other projects. And I thought I would just mention author Richard Poe. He's been a guest of mine. He recently posted a quote from a book he wrote in 2004. He said, "How did China catch up so fast? We sold them all the technology they needed or handed it over for free. As a globalist, Clinton promotes multipolarity, the doctrine that no country, such as the U.S., should be allowed to gain decisive advantage over others." So that's sort of my spiel. What's your assessment of, whether there are multiple camps where some are resisting the World Economic Forum, or whether they're merely fighting for a better seat at the table?
I don't think that the World Economic Forum is the top of the table, as it were. I think the World Economic Forum certainly came to the fore during what I've described as the pseudo pandemic, as a kind of almost like a kind of PR sales team for the to push forward this agenda of transition and movement towards a new, and something that I know that the World Economic Forum have spoken about in quite some detail, about the multipolar world order and the need for multipolarity and how it would be the foundation of a new global kind of compact. And again, we can look at, for example, we can look at the speech of what Mark Carney said at Jackson Hole Symposium at G7 Bankers meeting in 2019. A few months before the pseudo pandemic was declared, where he said that, if we're hoping to move toward the multipolar world order with a new global reserve currency, and that there is a sense of urgency, and this needs to be achieved toot sweet, because I think it was evident, as I said earlier, that since about 2008, the debt-based monetary system, global debt-based monetary system, was on its last legs. Quantitative easing can only stretch so far, and when it becomes to the point where there is no, as Mark Carney and Ben Bernanke and others agreed at the time, there is no wriggle room left, then something's got to change. And when it's the basis of their power structure, as I argue that is, or the basis, the source of their power and authority. And I'm not saying Mark Carney is like king of the world or anything like that. I'm saying that he represents a group of people and a body of people who have something that I've written about, sovereignty over and above nation states. And I have described that as a global public-private partnership. And I think we can go back to, I think it was 2009, then Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, announced that there had been what he called a quiet revolution at the United Nations. And he was putting forward the idea that the activities of the United Nations is no longer the activity of just government, but rather of government and business. So it's a fusion of the political state, if you like, and the corporate state, which you could argue is a form of fascism. That's what fundamentally the model of fascism that, as described by Mussolini. But I can understand why people would put their faith in the nation state as a bulwark against globalism. It seems to be the last kind of bastion against total global hegemony. But I would also point out that we are in the position that we are in at the moment, in the West, for example, because of the Westphalian model of the nation state. That's what's brought us to this point, because the nation state itself is the centralization of power and authority over people. So you are enabling people, the people that lead those nations, nominally lead those nation states, to form ever tighter circles and further centralized power and authority. And that is, embodied by perhaps something like the United Nations. So the idea of a multipolar world order and the idea of it being a collective of nation states, I don't see that as any particular defense against globalism. If we look at what's happening in places, particularly in China, for example, they seem to be quite a long way ahead in terms of certainly in terms of technocracy and certainly in terms of developing things like central bank digital currency. So again, if the idea is that the nation state of perhaps China or perhaps Russia is some bulwark against globalism, I don't see that.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't see that either. And you wrote an interesting piece, which I think irritated many people on the Putin false flag. And that's something that I looked into a decade ago, well before these conversations people are having now. I've read, but I mean, just like I believe we had the American false flag of 9/11, we've had the Russian false flag of the 1999 Moscow apartment bombings. And I just look at that objectively, no emotions. And it's like you look at it, it's clear that was Russian state terror. 9/11 was American state terror. Many countries have carried out, probably most, Turkey, Israel, we have the Operation Gladio, NATO false flags, and so on and on. The Japanese in the World War II, Rome. And so it's nothing new. And yeah, that's just further confirmation, I think, as you point out, that all of these state actors are not much different from each other. And if you have any thought on that, and as well, the idea of a third world war, they're hyping up this threat of World War III and what's going on in Ukraine, and get your thoughts there. Also Taiwan, they're talking about, where I do think elites would take us to World War III. It would very much serve their purposes, as well as we've seen in the past world wars. And just sort of your take on whether you think that if they're just trying to scare us now into submitting, or if whether that it would also serve their purposes to take us to a real military conflict.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I talked about, I spoke about what earlier. I mentioned something that I've called the global public-private partnership, which is a network of interests, shared interests at times, but not always. You mentioned about the idea of people jockeying for position and people vying for supremacy within a globalist system, for want of a better expression, a globalist system. So I think there is evidence of tensions there. For example, we can see that there have been some tensions between the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the World Health Organization. There seem to have been some tensions there around Bill's alternative offer of a global germ whatever it was that he was pitching for. But so these tensions exist, and I think that's normal. I mean, I think one of the things that we often fall into the trap with when we're talking about quote unquote elites, which I refer to as the parasite class, because they don't deliver anything of any benefit as far as I can see, and they amass their fortunes and they wield their power and authority over us at our expense. So, but they're just normal people, they're not. I think the whole point is they're not special. They're not particularly unusually gifted or incredibly articulate or any of those things. It's just that they happen to be and have maneuvered themselves. I mean, they might have. I'm sure that as a group of people, you could probably find a greater degree of cunning among them than you perhaps would amongst any other group of people. But that's not necessarily the case either. So they're just ordinary people that make mistakes. They have arguments. They fight with each other, and they cause mayhem in the process because, as one of the problems is that they are able to shift billions of dollars. They're able to move armies. They're able to change geopolitical structures. And so when they quarrel, it can be very worrying for the rest of us. That at the same time, there are genuine political tensions, geopolitical tensions between countries sometimes. So, for example, if we look at the situation in Ukraine, there is clearly some justification. You could argue that there is some justification for Russia's special military operation. Equally, you could say that perhaps Russia could have done a lot more in the previous 8 years to avoid that, just as undoubtedly NATO and the EU and NATO aligned states could have done a lot more to avoid it. So there seemed to be some willingness on both sides of the equation to end up in a conflict. So then you need to think, well, if that is possible, whose benefit does it serve? Well, if we look at whose benefit it's currently serving, certainly the sanctions appear to be fundamentally serving those who would like to impose an austere form of technocracy upon Western populations. It's arguable that what we're seeing with the sanctions appear to be aimed against us rather than aimed against Russia. Russia itself is coping with the sanctions quite well, is certainly developing new markets very rapidly. But also at the same time, obviously, the sanctions are going to have an economic impact on Russia as well. So it's not as if it's not like it's just as simple as them getting a helping hand. But you could argue that in forming a closer alliance with, for example, the other BRICS nations, and moving towards the idea of perhaps a new basket of international currencies, which might be on the basis of a new kind of special drawing right, then there is an advantage to the war from the Russian perspective for that reason, as well as any strategic value that it has.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you would agree with me. Over the past 2 years, my biggest concern has been this cashless society, as you mentioned, CBDC. I view Bitcoin and crypto. My view is just that it's a globalist sort of Trojan horse that I think it came from the elites sort of to whet our appetites towards this idea of a central bank digital currency and cashless system. And the vaccine passports basically are the digital ID, are the social credit system, and every country now is attempting to install these systems. They're advancing rapidly. I'm watching it closely in Mexico, where I live, and in other countries. And this is my biggest concern. I view it as the primary threat, because if this gets installed, we're completely screwed. Like, they can just shut everything off for the individual citizen, and it's game over. You can't buy food, you can't work, you can't travel, you can't do anything. And I think it's a worse threat than World War. I mean, you can always move geographically to another location if there's a war, but if every single country installs these systems, we're screwed, and sort of what's your take on that and how you see them advancing?
Yeah, and I made just a brief comment the other day where I just said that in my view, CBDC is the end game. But what I meant by that was, I think when we get to the stage where CBDC is accepted, because I don't think CBDC is acceptable either to a large proportion of the business and the banking community at the moment, especially the private, the perhaps some of the smaller private sector banks are not so amenable to the idea, because potentially it could cut them out of the usury system that they currently benefit from. But I know that the model that is being pursued is still maintaining what John Knight has referred to as the split monetary circuit, the idea that you have a base currency. So you would have, I can't remember what the model of the CBDC, they're calling it you have the commercial CBDC, and the other, I can't remember the term that they're giving it for the idea of central bank CBDC. But the idea is that you still essentially have this transfer of wealth between these two separate circuits, which is very similar to the usury model that we've got now. So it's not necessarily a change in that model, and that model might be more appealing to the commercial high street banks, who are, then would still be able to make their coin as they do at the moment, and create money as they do at the moment. But I said that CBDC was the end game because in order to get to that point, there are a number of things that have to happen first in order for us to accept that CBDC, and that is, I think, ultimately that will entail a significant global economic collapse. So at the point that happens, then obviously we're looking at the kind of devastation that probably most of us have, not few of us that are still alive can remember. So we're looking at a cataclysm if that is the method to convince us that we need CBDC. And my great fear is that it may well be. And if that turns out to be the case, obviously that's bad enough. But as you quite rightly said, CBDC as programmable money, which is what it is, which, I'm sure most people may be familiar with that famous clip of Augustin Carsten saying, we don't know where $100 is, but with CBDC, we've got the technology that we need to control everything. They're not joking. They are absolutely serious about that. It's not it's not wishful thinking on their part. The technology is fairly simple to implement. So they could potentially, not individually, obviously. I would envisage that these things would probably be run by some sort of AI system that would, there'd be algorithms checking on your whether you're a suitable person to buy that piece of media, or whether you're a suitable person to buy that piece of food, or, So we're talking about total technological slavery of the human species if CBDC is widely adopted and accepted. And if it becomes the only form of money, which would be, or the only form of legal tender, then that is the end of human freedom. Our alternative to that would be to develop alternative payment systems, to develop alternative systems that we use, because what is money at the end of the day? It's just a system of exchange that you and I agree on. You and I can agree to exchange anything. Could be lemons, could be tins of tuna. We can. It's you and I that agree what the value of it is. So we don't necessarily need. Well, we certainly don't need their system of exchange. We can develop other systems of exchange. Now, like you, I am suspicious of Bitcoin, certainly, and certainly what's the Ethereum, I think, and some of the bigger coins I think, yeah, there's reason to be doubtful about why we have been encouraged so much to use them. However, I don't think we should lose sight of what the technology means. So it's the blockchain technology underpinning it that is truly egalitarian, and nobody owns that. Anyone can set up a blockchain network, and that would enable us to, for example, you and I, to trade and barter without the need of a middleman. So I think we should be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. While we can be suspicious of Bitcoin and other, I think, particularly stable coins, I think that, things that are tied to commodities, then we're really starting to get into the same control mechanisms that we're already living under, yeah. So I think while we could be suspicious of those things, I think we should also look to value the potential for the fundamental technology underlying it, which anyone can use. It doesn't have to be the banks. We can use it too.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, I think this is the next, this is the next inning in the game. This is what's coming next, and maybe to add, because I'm always trying to extrapolate based on what we know and what we're talking about. What's next? And I think the next thing on the horizon is what you just mentioned: this economic collapse sort of situation. I don't know. No one knows what it's going to look like. They've talked about cyber pandemics. I just can envision where banks shut down. Maybe they say there was some hack, and then basically, I mean, the biggest fear is our accounts are wiped out. We go to zero, and then they tell us, oh, well, we're going to look what happened. Here's our solution, this biometric CBDC type system where you use your digital passports and all of this. So I'm sort of fearing this is on the horizon, and maybe it'll be coupled with new lockdowns. I feel like they're preparing us for new lockdowns. The Biden administration was supposed to, like a week ago, announce whether they were going to extend the state of emergency or not. They haven't, which sort of signals it seems like they're going to extend the COVID state of emergency in the U.S. They just they're about to buy 600 million doses of new vaccines for the fall. Germany is updating their Biosecurity Act. So Germans are going to have to wear masks from October to April and use these color-coded Chinese-style social credit apps. So masks are coming back in many places. So it really seems like we're not done with the lockdowns, and they're building out this infrastructure. They're not going to stop now. They might switch it to climate lockdown. Robin Monotti on Telegram today was saying that there might be a nuclear event in Ukraine, and the WHO might declare because of the nuclear events, a nuclear lockdown. And so, what are your thoughts on, if you extrapolate regarding new lockdowns, or what the road ahead might look like?
Yeah, I think. I mean, one thing that I was, not just me, but a number of other people as well that were trying to argue almost from the beginning of what we might call the pseudo pandemic, is that this is not the end. This is the start. That the COVID-19 is the start of, I would suggest, what is looking increasingly like the final push for global governance. Global governance has always been the objective. I mean, we can go back hundreds of years for the ambitions of people that were ambitious of empire, and it's the same old game as ever. It's the ultimate extension of the game of empire, isn't it? I mean, the centralized global empire is the end. Is the ultimate goal, and I think that has been pursued for many years. Realistically, it was neither logistically nor technologically feasible, up until maybe the 1970s or the 80s. But then from that point onwards, it started becoming more and more. I mean, I think we can perhaps look to Brzezinski's technotronic era, between two ages, where he was suggesting, and I think, a lot of people heard what he had to say, that moment was coming. That technology would enable the kind of particularly communication technology and computing technology would enable a global control grid, and that's what we're seeing roll out now. That is what's happening. And and with regard to the division between the so-called different models, the unipolar world order and the multipolar world order. Well, of course, division's always used, isn't it? Divide and conquer is another age-old tactic. Well, we're supporting one side or the other. Meanwhile, the people that are running the game are stashing all the money away in the back room, and that's what's happening. We're not in a situation really where there is any notable resistance to the idea of moving towards this technocratic global system. I can't see it anywhere. There isn't any sort of country that is resisting that. Despite what people say about, for example, Putin standing up to the WEF-ish, if you want to put it that way, Great Reset agenda through a war, which I think is unusual, through a military conflict where people are being killed, obviously, that this is somehow defeating the WEF-ish model. It seems to me that it's absolutely perfect. It's facilitating the further acceleration of that model in the West, certainly, and in the East. It's enabling the creation of something else that our would-be overlords have spoken about for many years, this transition to a new global economic engine of the world, which will be, the BRICS and China and Russia. I mean, that seems to be part of the Great Reset, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think we get hung up about things like Great Reset, the term itself, just because obviously the WEF written so copiously about what they want it to deliver. But as I said, I mean, I think the WEF themselves are PR team for the want of a better expression, New World Order. So,
Yeah, I mean, I just use that term because it's easier. I agree with you. The real powers are behind the scenes. Most of we don't even know the real names. And I've had guests on from the left and right. I've had socialist professor William Robinson talking about how this global capitalism is failing, and that all states, even Russia and China, it's basically all states versus their own populations, including the Russians and the Chinese, where they're trying to establish these fourth industrial revolution technologies to prevent a revolution from below populist, as we're seeing now, social unrest. So we've got people like William Robinson from the left who can see that, and especially conservatives as well. And so yeah, it's basically all ruling oligarchies in every country versus their own population. I don't really see. I totally agree with you. I don't really see. I see what the war in Ukraine is just accelerating the Great Reset agenda. Are there any anything else apart from what we've covered? Is there anything else that really perturbs you, that's front and center on your mind, apart from Ukraine, CBDCs? Is there anything else that you're sort of looking at that you think is important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I'm starting to write recently about potential solutions, because I think it can seem, when you're looking at this kind of information, and I'm sure you perhaps experienced it yourself, that it's overwhelming. You just kind of think, how can anyone stop this? It seems to be like an inevitable onslaught of an approaching juggernaut. I mean, it's just it seems that way. And I don't think that's the case. I think the reason that we are deluged with so much propaganda is that it is absolutely vital for the success of their plan that we go along with it. It can't work unless we go along with it. Hence, we have to be convinced by any means, fair or foul, to go along with it. So it's clearly very important to them to that the level of propaganda during COVID. I mean, I thought, I thought I'd never see anything like that again until, the first couple of months of the conflict in Ukraine, which just stepped it up another level. So clear, I think we can take encouragement from that. What we think and what we do really matters. So therefore, I think we hold the solution to the problem. And I think that's going to come through us taking increasing responsibility for the way that we conduct ourselves in our daily lives. I think that's going to mean that people are going to have to face up to something that most people don't want to do, which is living a harder life, which is less convenient and less, is more challenging, not less challenging. But if people are willing to do that, if people are willing to accept that challenge because it's moving them towards something which is important, and I think what we're talking about here is the survival of humanity, and I personally value humanity. So that is something that I think is important, and I hope that there are other people that do as well, enough to the extent that they're willing to do something about it. Now, but I'm not overly convinced that we can do that. What we need to do about it is go on protest march, wave flags, and get involved in confrontations with people. I don't think that is necessary. I think that the way that we can really do something about it is by just changing our behaviour. The whole point of for example, the biosecurity state controls that are coming in is to control our behaviour. So it is through exercising behavioural choice that we can challenge it. So, for example, just really small things. If you go to a store, for example, and they refuse to accept cash, then don't just leave. Tell them why you're leaving. Saying, I've been shopping at this store for 5 years or whatever, but I'm afraid I won't be able to shop here anymore if you won't accept cash. It's things like that, just little things. And, where we buy our food, how we pay our energy bills, all this kind of stuff. If we make these changes, then collectively we have control. I'm absolutely convinced of that. It's us. It's the 7 billion of us. We're in control. We just don't know it.
Yeah, and this has been a recurring theme on the podcast when I ask guests, what do we do? Because I focus, as you do, on solutions, but also bracing for impact as we sort of move in, because we still don't know how bad things might get. And as you say, my wife, she's got the Apple iPhone. I'm like, you're done. We're going to stop using that. I'm going to get I'm going to de-Google an Android phone for you, because that's like the best option in terms of smartphones. If you're going to use, is having a de-Googled Android phone, which you can use like Lineage, which doesn't talk with a Google, or using cash, as you said, building parallel structures, not buying on Amazon or going to big box stores, and that sort of thing. And in terms of bracing for impact, I guess if you've got any other, it seems one of the most common themes is people leaving the urban areas, going to more rural areas, getting some piece of land where you have at least water, ability to grow food, have some animals for meat, so you don't have to eat bug burgers. And any other thoughts on sort of writing things out? Because some of us are already experiencing the social credit system. I don't have access anymore to Patreon or PayPal. Others don't have access to air travel, that are on no-fly lists. Some have had their bank accounts turned off, and so on and so forth. And any further thoughts on bracing for impact, prepping, or even better or worse geographies, if you've ever thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, what concerns me about that, I think, is, I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. I mean, if you've got the ability to find, a bit of land somewhere, or maybe form some sort of collective that enables you to sort of prepare for a more sustainable and a more self-sufficient life, which I think is where what we need to be. We need to be more self-sufficient, more self-reliant. Great, that's really good. But a lot of people, and I think the situation, for example, in the UK is quite different. We're quite a crowded little island. Land is extremely expensive and is owned by some big landowners who and other people that own parcels of land that they protect. Land is very fenced off in the UK. We've got lots of laws and lots of legislation about what you can or cannot do in dwellings and what dwellings you can live in and so forth. So it's difficult. A lot more people live in urban areas, built up urban areas, where perhaps they don't have the opportunity to grow their own food. People live in flats. I live in a flat. I haven't got a garden. So it makes things difficult for a lot of people in terms of that kind of subsistence lifestyle. However, I think that is the way forward to increase our independence as much as possible. But I think the key to it is going to be us talking to each other face to face. It's not going to be done online through, with the greatest of respect, through a Zoom call or through on Twitter or something like that. We are going to have to do this by, God forbid, going out and talking to our neighbours and forming those kind of relationships, so that we can defend ourselves and our families in our little parts of the world. And if that leads to a greater kind of coming together of people who might, for example, start kind of collectives and things like that, where they can perhaps afford to buy some land and so forth, great. I mean, that'd be fantastic. But I think the first thing we need to do, which is something we don't do as much as we should, is just start talking to each other in the street. Just don't walk around like that with your head down, not daring to look anyone in the eye. We need to say, hello, how are you? Good morning. Start those conversations, start reaching out to people, because ultimately we are going to be each other's defense. So, we need to start coming together.
Yeah, I think that's the best way forward. One of the best solutions, networking, having community. Many guests also have said you need to have a network. You can't do anything by yourself. And I've been seeing that on the ground in Mexico, or here where I am in Croatia, finding like-minded folks. I've even been meeting some of my listeners from across the world. And so, yeah, we need to start talking and educating some of our neighbors. And I think, 2 years ago, probably some of my neighbors in Mexico thought, oh, I'm the crazy guy who says, COVID-1984 is a pseudo pandemic, as you say. And I think 2 years later, they're like, yeah, I can kind of see now what he was talking about. And maybe they're not as put off anymore by me. So we all have to be doing that sort of thing. And, any final thought then to leave us with?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, just do everything that you can to inform yourself, do everything that you can to, as you said, prepare yourself, and just think about the choices that you make every day. So, don't just go to order something off Amazon. Or it might be harder, and it might be inconvenient to walk to the local hardware store to get the same thing, and it might cost you a little bit more, but it's worth it, because those are the things that are going to make a difference ultimately. If we vote with our wallets, that will have by far the biggest impact upon our would-be controllers, I believe.
Yeah, at this juncture, I also see that as the number one thing for at least prolonging freedom for as long as is possible. And I think you just changed your website name. I think before, if I'm not mistaken, it was in this together, but now it's just IainDavis.com. If you want to tell us again about the best places to find you online and your projects and so on.
Yeah, it's IainDavis.com. It's Iain spelt with 2 I, so it's IAIN Davis.com. I write there predominantly. That's where I write. I also, my work is often syndicated by OffGuardian. I'm very fortunate that I work occasionally for UK Column. UK Column puts out a news show 3 times a week. I heartily recommend people check them out. It's really good stuff that they're doing. They're doing a fantastic job. I also, occasionally write for Unlimited Hangout for Whitney Webb, on Whitney website with Whitney Webb. At the moment, like you, I am unable to use anything like PayPal or Patreon or anything like that. And now I'm finding it increasingly difficult to use any kind of email provider. So I'm banned from Aweber and all those kind of people. So at the moment, unfortunately, I normally give my book away for free in exchange for people that subscribe to my emailing list. Unfortunately, I can't do that at the moment because I've got a technical problem which I'm trying to sort out at the moment. Hopefully it won't be too long. But normally everything that I do, I give away for free. There's no I don't sell anything. The only thing I sell are my books, hard copies of my books, because obviously there's a printing cost to them. But other than that, I just want to get the information out there and just want people to share the information.
Yeah, I've been noticing as well. The next, I guess, part of the battle is trouble with the email services. I've been starting to see that as well. Actually, my private email service I use, StartMail, is banned in Russia and Kazakhstan, my former home. And I think increasingly the powers that be are siphoning off, throwing our emails into spam, like my Geopolitics and Empire.com email, I think, is increasingly ending up in spams. But in any case, keep up the great work. Be sure everyone to check out IainDavis.com. I was trying to sign up to your newsletter, but it kept giving me an error. So I'll try again when you fix it in the near future. And thank you again for being on Geopolitics and Empire.
Oh, thank you very much, Hedge. It's very nice to. Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.